From the Millersville University Weather Center, I'm student meteorologist Ethan Kerr.
And I'm student meteorologist Peyton Simmers.
And we're here with Weather Watch, a student-run club at Millersville that produces weather-related videos. It's been pretty quiet on Weather Watch for about 5 years or so, but after a long hibernation, we're bringing it back in a little bit of a new format. We'll be here with the students at Millersville talking about all sorts of severe weather. And we have a little bit of a tropical storm brewing in the Gulf of Mexico, which brings us here for our first installment.
So we take it over to the satellite, Ethan. We're going to show this. This is Tropical Storm Francine. It is currently in the Bay of Campeche, and it's just, centered a little bit southeast of Brownsville, Texas. This was named this morning after being dubbed Potential Tropical Cyclone 6 as of the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Winds are sustained at 60 miles per hour. It's been going up steadily throughout the day. But noticing here on the satellite, you have a lot of good convection going on the northern side of the storm. A lot of lightning up there too. But I'm starting to notice, Ethan, from earlier today, the cloud tops for most of the day were, and it's popping up very briefly at the very beginning. It was really sub negative 80 Celsius, which is really good across the center of the circulation. But I've noticed over the past couple hours, the IR not as impressive on the southern side of the storm, as there's some dry air getting entrained into the system. And that doesn't shock me given how, this is a counterclockwise circulation, meaning that it's going to be pulling dry air off the mountains of Mexico and downsloping it. So this is a concern with intensification. I still believe this gets to Cat 2 as the NHC is forecasting. But other than that, right now, it's not a bad looking storm. Looking at it from a visible satellite, it still looks pretty impressive. Again, you can really see that dry air getting into the center circulation, which is right in here. And I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the National Hurricane Center.
So you see the cone here from the NHC. You can see those hurricane watches. My color blindness, I can't tell if that's blue or purple on the Texas and Louisiana coast.
They actually have a couple hurricane warnings for
so
some of the parishes.
So we have hurricane warnings in southern Louisiana and some tropical storm watches on the Texas and Louisiana coastlines. And some of those tropical storm warnings do extend a few parishes inland. And as Peyton mentioned, the Tropical Storm Francine is expected to strengthen into a Category 2 hurricane. And Peyton, if you want to go back to the infrared satellite, as Peyton mentioned how these cloud tops were, at least earlier, a lot of them were minus 80 degrees Celsius. He's talking about something called brightness temperature, which is basically how these satellites can derive the temperature of these cloud tops. And you can imagine these really tall clouds, they get high into the atmosphere, they get even colder. And something else I point out looking at the satellite is, you can see there was that big burst of convection, and now you can see that really strong spiral rain band Peyton talked about. It'll be interesting to see how things develop tonight, because we are kind of in the late afternoon, what we call with hurricanes the diurnal minimum, where it's kind of at its most stable over the water. But when you get to nighttime, the air cools down, but the air right over the water still stays pretty warm. You can sometimes see intensification with these tropical storms. So it'll be really critical, I think, to see what it looks like come tomorrow morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's also going to depend on that dry air. It's pulling off those mountains in Mexico. And back to the National Hurricane Center, again, 100 miles per hour at this point as of the 5 p.m. advisory. I could maybe see that getting up to 105. It also depends on what happens tonight, again, as Ethan was saying, with that D-min. And if we move over to storm surge, this is going to be another really key part of this storm. The Louisiana coast, very shallow shelf there, and we've seen a lot of storms produce some major storm surge. Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. We have these storm surge watches and warnings really extending from near Galveston all the way to St. Plaquemines Parish and St. Bernard Parish over in Louisiana. Along the whole Louisiana Gulf Coast, we have storm surge watches for parts of Lake Borgne and Lake Pontchartrain, and along the Mississippi coast from Gulfport to Biloxi and over to the Alabama border. The NEC is forecasting some substantial storm surge, 5 to 10 feet, where this storm really makes landfall, just to the east of that circulation. I can believe seeing 10 feet of storm surge in somewhere, 2 to 4 feet around New Orleans. So we could see, a little bit. Those levees are built up quite nice now. Lake Pontchartrain, 2 to 4 feet, 4 to 7 just to south of near Plaquemines Parish. We have 1 to 3 feet from Galveston Bay all the way down to Brownsville. So if you're near the coast, there are evacuations in place. Or you know anyone near the coast, you want to give them a call to tell them to really get out of there. You don't want to mess around with the storm surge that is life-threatening at this point.
Yep, and unfortunately, I mean, Louisiana, we've had this really active stretch of hurricane seasons the past maybe 5 to 10 years, and Louisiana, you can argue, has been the hardest hit. They had Laura in 2020, they had Zeta in 2022, 2 major hurricanes, Ida, another Cat 4 hurricane in 2021. So they've been really hit hard by hurricanes these past 4 years or so. So certainly not a place that needs it there.
No, absolutely not. And again, don't mess around with storm surge. That is the deadliest part, and even freshwater flooding is going to be a huge concern. I want to jump into some model guidance with this. I want to start off here with the forecasting model that the Hurricane Center tends to stay close to when they draw their tracks. This is the 18Z DRCL. This is the specified hurricane model. This is what they tend to draw their tracks on. The DRCL near landfall has 97 peak wind speed, which for the Hurricane Center, they will translate that to 100 miles per hour. So very good indication that we are going to have a Cat 2 hurricane. Again, I could see it a little stronger than that, but it depends on how much dry air gets entrained into the system. So that's what the DRCL says. I completely agree with the DRCL. Follows their cone really nicely as of 5 p.m.
The one thing we do meteorologists like to keep track of with these forecasts is to not focus so much on the exact center of the track, but to pay attention to that entire cone. And even outside of the cone, you can see effects. I mean, we'll probably see heavy rainfall and maybe severe weather and coastal flooding in Mississippi and out to Alabama. Parts of coastal Mississippi aren't even in the cone. So that's why it's really important to not pay attention to the exact center, especially because even that could adjust as the forecast changes.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ethan. If you're in, and that's why they made this new forecasting cone. You can see the inland watches and warnings.
Yeah, you used to not be able to see that.
You used not to be able to see that way. This is great because you can see we have tropical storm watches along the whole Texas coast, and they're not even in the cone. So they could still see these tropical storm force winds. They're even extending well out, and they're onto the Mexico coast.
Yep.
So this is why they have this. Even if you're inland and outside of the cone, like Biloxi and Gulfport aren't in the cone, but they're in storm surge watches. And they'll probably be upgraded the warnings here.
And I mean, such a pretty decent amount of tropical storm hurricane-related deaths in this country nowadays are from even just rip currents hundreds of miles away. I mean, I haven't looked, but I'm pretty sure that on the west coast of Florida, hundreds of miles away from the storm, it won't be good for swimming this week. Pretty dangerous for swimming, I'd have to imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. When Hurricane Ernesto came up the coast a couple of weeks ago, actually it stayed well offshore and hit Bermuda. That had a couple people drown because of the very strong rip currents from the swells that it was drawing, and that was hundreds of miles offshore. But yeah, this is key. So don't focus on the cone. Focus on the watches and warnings that you are, and listen to authorities if you have to evacuate. Now, coming back into the models here, this is the 18Z GFS. This is the new run of the GFS 6 hours from now. What I'm looking at here is the cyclonic vorticity, or energy in the atmosphere that it's basically synoptic scale spin. It's just spin and energy in the atmosphere. This is low level. I'm looking at 850 millibars. Quite a well-defined circulation just off Mexico, and that reflected really well in the satellite. Now, notice these wind barbs right here. They're pulling off dry air off the mountains, and I said that this is going to cause some downsloping, which when the air downslopes, it dries out and it warms. This one trains some of it into the system, which I think is what's going on right now with this dry air. It's pulling it off those mountains, and that's why there's some dry air issues. I think this storm overcomes it as it moves away, and it keeps getting, it looks really good here as it gets into landfall here at about 7 p.m. Wednesday. That's when the Hurricane Center has landfall. I totally agree with that. And it's going to come up, make landfall to the west of New Orleans, and then it's going to come up through Mississippi and then eventually just string itself out. Now, if I go over to the relative humidity on the GFS, this may not reflect it as well. You will notice, there is some dry air coming in right off the mountains. It's going to entrain in. So, but there could be a little bit more than that. As it keeps moving up, notice a lot of more dry air. There's a trough to the north of this as well, which is going to create more of a hostile environment with some wind shear. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. But you can see dry air coming in here, and that could make it interesting when it comes to the tornado threat, and we'll get to that as well.
Yep.
When I pull over to the wind shear, where is it? There it is. If I back this up, it's in a decent pocket, decent pocket to intensify. Notice all these reds up here across the southeast coast, or the southeast United States. There's a trough right there, and this, where it is, could help to ventilate the storm a little bit, and that's why it's probably been intensifying all day. But it's going to be coming up into this wind shear, and it's going to be getting more sheared as it gets closer to the coast, and that could cause some weakening upon coming up, but can't guarantee that. We've seen these storms explode up until landfall, given the Gulf of Mexico is bathwater at this point.
Yeah, really warm water.
Very warm water. Who knows how this wind shear will play? I could expect some weakening as it comes onto the shore, though. Not much, though.
Yep, it's interesting. I've seen some people talk about it right now, kind of earlier in its life. Peyton talked about how, it's still a tropical storm right now. It doesn't appear to be rapidly intensifying yet. It was interesting, although it's close proximity to the Mexican coast. I have seen some research, and maybe this is part of the reason why it did spin up pretty quickly this morning, research that a tropical cyclone near the coast, you kind of get increased convergence from the winds and the friction on the coastline that can kind of enhance the spin in a tropical cyclone a little bit as it develops. So that's another interesting point. And if you go to the 250 millibar winds, Peyton, you can kind of see that, what you were talking about, or 200 millibars, sorry. You can see first of all, you can see kind of a counterclockwise rotation around the tropical storm, and that's that upper level high pressure. So as air gets sucked into the hurricane, it gets ventilated out the top of it, and that's how you get a stronger storm. And then, as Peyton talked about, as it moves up the coast in the next couple days, it starts to interact with that trough, which, as he mentioned, was kind of a double-edged sword, because it kind of helps to ventilate the storm where those strong winds are on the northeast. You get accelerating winds aloft north of the storm. That increases the divergence aloft. But at the same point, you do get that increased wind shear, and that'll help to maybe bring some dry air into the south side of the circulation right before landfall. But I should note that won't really, even if it does wind up weakening slightly or it doesn't get quite to Cat 2, although that is the forecast right now, that won't really change the impacts much. I mean, storm surge and heavy rain are the biggest two impacts here. And quite frankly, you're not going to notice too much if it's 100 miles per hour or 90 miles per hour or 105 miles per hour.
Yeah, while we're talking about the rain, let me pull up the QPF at some point. I know this is something that you can't take to the bank, but the GFS is spitting out some impressive totals over a foot at the landfall point. I believe that to be pretty accurate. If I pull over to the European model, it's 12Z. It's pretty on point, 8 to 12 inches of rain at that point of landfall. So yeah, flash flooding is going to be a concern. But also what I'm concerned about, Ethan, is the potential for some tornadoes on the east side of the storm.
Yep. Yeah, it's something you always are concerned with these tropical cyclones as they make landfall. You get really strong wind shear on the northeast side, the northeast quadrant of these northward moving landfalling storms. And you can see here that slight risk from the Storm Prediction Center for Wednesday. So that's almost certainly for the tornado risk. So there's already a day 3 highlighting an enhanced risk for tornadoes in southeast Louisiana, parts of Mississippi, and maybe even that isolated tornado threat extending further east into parts of southern Alabama and the western Florida panhandle.
Yeah, it's no surprise to see this either. When tropical cyclones make landfall, increases friction. That can really spin up these tornadoes. These spin up very fast. So areas like New Orleans, Slidell, Baton Rouge are all in this, what will be a tornado-driven slight risk. And pull over to the models here. I know this is the NAM 3K, and this thing is not great with forecasting tropical cyclones. Ignore how strong the storm makes it. I mean, 932, that's just not going to happen. But what we can use this for is to look at the environment outside of the main circulation, to look at those feeder bands, to see what the environment looks like. And there you go. This is what we have for that tornado threat. Not much cape, but that's to be expected with these. But look at the wind shear. 27, 42, 44. That's good with the SRH of 260, 347. Now, these numbers will inevitably change, but I do expect several tornadoes to form with this tropical cyclone.
Yep, you do see that like kind of sickle-shaped photograph that we talk about, whether people talk about classic for tornadoes. And the big thing is, shear's pretty much never an issue with these landfalling hurricanes. It's usually the instability, and something that, if I could take over here for a second, Peyton was talking about with the dry air. Sometimes, and we saw this with Beryl, which produced a massive tropical tornado outbreak in July in parts of Texas, Louisiana. If we get this shear and this dry air to kind of wrap into the storm as it makes landfall, and you get that nose of dry air kind of getting into the eastern side in Mississippi and Alabama, that can kind of cause some clearing. It can steepen those lapse rates, increase the instability a little bit, and can increase the tornado potential. So that'll be something interesting to watch. These landfalling storms that start to interact with troughs and get some dry air pulled into them can produce sometimes a few more tornadoes than others. So that'll be something to pay close attention to. But another thing I'll mention is that tropical tornado forecasting is really tough. We're not very good at it. So It's kind of with everyone. Oh, there's a tornado threat. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, again, I expect several tornadoes. And look, Ethan, if you look at the sounding, this green line here represents the dew point, which is the moisture up through the column, which is how moist is the atmosphere, essentially. You can notice there's some dry punches in here, which could make it interesting with these tornadoes, which can help to steepen the lapse rates and get that instability up a little bit.
Yeah, we'll see how much that mid-level dry air wraps around the eastern side of the storm if we get a big arc of supercells with it. Hopefully we don't, because we have had this year 2 tornado-related fatalities from tropical cyclones, so we don't want that to keep going.
Yeah, both of those being from Hurricane Beryl, which produced, again, a prolific
one of them was
outbreak.
from Beryl, and actually the second one was from Debbie in North Carolina.
That's right. Yeah, Debbie had a couple.
An EF3, actually. So there's been a really bad year for tornadoes overall, and also with these tropical storms.
Yeah, again, it will be something we'll have to keep an eye on. This will definitely change with these. Models aren't even great with doing tropical forecasting with tornadoes as well, because, again, they just form so fast. They may not even have tornado warnings on them. That's how incredible that these are, and there's a lot of research being done on these. But other than that, I think we pretty much have this pretty good wrapped up.
Actually, let me look at one more thing. It's a cool product on Tropical Tidbits before we wrap up. Kind of sum up everything we've been talking about. If I go to Hurricane and I go to Francine, you can do these average soundings.
Oh, I didn't even know about this.
You can kind of see, if we go kind of here it is now, and it'll show you the shear, what level the shear's in, what level the max shear's in. And as you go along, as you get towards landfall, you can kind of see, and even in that top right corner, you can kind of see the humidity plot, and then there's the wind. You can kind of see that idea of that shear that Peyton was talking about as it interacts, that trough starts to increase 25 knots, as opposed to now where the shear is analyzed on the model, at least to be on the weaker side, and it will actually weaken even more tonight and tomorrow, which is why we expect that strengthening. And then that shear picks up, and you get a little bit of that mid-level dry air in there as well on this particular run of the GFS, right around landfall. So it'll definitely be something interesting to watch. The storm surge and the heavy rain look to be the biggest threats, especially as this thing kind of slows down a little bit into the Mississippi Valley and fizzles out. So a lot of things to keep an eye on with this thing as hurricane season looks to be ramping up again.
Yeah, and actually, while we're on that, this isn't the only storm that the Hurricane Center is watching. We have, if I go to the 7-day, we have, they just upgraded that to a high. That's new. This storm has been, this is 92. This has a 60% chance of developing over the next 7 days. This one doesn't have an invest designation. This has a high chance of forming over the next 7 days. So this is peak season.
Yep.
Climatologically is tomorrow.
Might not have felt like it the past few weeks, but it is. It is.
Absolutely not. But, we have other storms out in what we call the main development region that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Those look like they won't affect land at this point. they'll go out to sea and become fish storms.
But still got to keep an eye on them.
Still have to keep an eye on them. So I think that's pretty much where we wrap it up.
I think so. I think this was a great a kind of a grand opening to the Weather Watch YouTube channel, reopening, restarting as we get working here. And we hope to have several more videos over the next school year. Whenever there's severe weather, the tropics like we did today, or a severe weather outbreak, tornado outbreak, winter weather, or even long-range stuff, kind of all of it. Excited to bring that to you this year with the rest of our students here at Millersville University. So thank you guys for tuning in and have a great day.
Thank you.